A police dog battles a gang in a shadowy alley, risking everything to keep his trainer safe. But when nobody expects the trainer, who was hurt while on duty, to explain why he is known as the hardest officer in town. You'll be left speechless by what follows. Iron Cliff wasn't known for its compassion, its dim lanes, its stories of crime, treachery, and silent desperation were revealed on graffiti-covered walls. However, even in a location like this, there were guardians, men and dogs, who patrolled the streets, keeping chaos at bay. One such guard was Order Officer Jack Mason, a legendary figure in the field. With his criminals feared him because of his square jaw, penetrating stare, and composed manner, which belied a history of victories. Respected by his peers, Jack had Max by his side during his battle. His dependable German Shepherd, a police dog with exceptional training and reflexes that are more acute than any combination of blades, were an unstoppable team that took on cases that others thought were too risky. But tonight, as Jack and Max patrolled a section of town controlled by the government, the stakes were different and the atmosphere was tense. Whispers had made it to the infamous Steel Fangs gang, an organization known for smuggling and vicious brutality. Jack offered without warning about an illicit weapons sale occurring in the former factory district. Max, whose dark fur blended into the shadows, was by his side without hesitation as always. As they got closer to the suspected location, the plant loomed like a ghost, his keen eyes searching every inch. Years of neglect have left its rusty doors and broken windows. Jack's footsteps were quiet, but Max moved like. Suddenly, a deep growl rumbled from Max's liquid shadow, attentive, precise, and ready. Jack's throat froze as he implicitly trusted Max's intuition before he could. Reacting, the industrial door slammed open, and individuals with frightening weapons appeared. The Steel Fangs were obviously unprepared for the company, but their astonishment soon gave way to resentment when they saw Max, they asked, "What do we have here?" One of them sneered, a ruthless smile growing across his face. Jack gripped Max as he grew electric, standing his ground, his body taut, his fangs bared as though daring them to move. When commotion broke out and the first strike quickly followed, his radio was ready to call for support. Max shrieked as a steel pipe swung through the air, but it was too late. Max yelled, interrupting the sound. Like a knife, the group was unaware that they had just committed the worst error of their life during the night. Max's yelp was followed by a deafening quiet, and Jack turned to face the gang members, his eyes clouded with rage. Max's hand automatically reached for his holstered handgun, and despite his injuries, he made an effort to remain determined. The dog's devotion was unwavering despite the pain shooting through his body. But Jack knew he had to move quickly too. Jack mumbled beneath his breath, his voice low and filled with threats from the gang's boss. "I made a big mistake by protecting my partner." A tall man named Rocco, who had tattoos that crawled up his neck like vines, came forward with a crowbar. And he had a reputation for being brutal. "It seems that your young dogs are not as tough as they once were," after Officer Rocco made fun of his gang. Jack kept his clear head while everyone laughed together. "Why don't you give up your pistol and go now?" He counted 6 gang members, each with a pipe, chain, or knife, to assess the situation. Backup was still minutes away, but Jack knew that Max was his top concern and that he couldn't afford to wait. Jack calmly but firmly ordered the dog to stay down, even though he could see that it was in pain. Obeyed, backing away behind Jack and growling softly to let the gang know he wasn't done yet, because the factory wasn't well lit. The area was filled with damaged machinery, stacks of crates, and flickering fluorescent lights that formed eerie shadows. Jack walked inconspicuously, offering possible cover and concealing locations for the gang's reinforcements. "I'm giving you one opportunity, Rocco." He positioned himself between Max and the gang as his thoughts worked to come up with a solution. Jack's words, which sliced through the tension like a razor, said, "Stand down or you'll regret touching my." Rocco, your buddy, grinned, obviously displeased. "You believe you're the tough guy here. This is our domain." The gang started to fan out their measured maneuvers as they surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, and out of your league. One of Jack and Max, a wiry man with a scar down his cheek, lunged, swinging a chain forward in Jack's direction. Jack sidestepped the strike and delivered a. The gang member screamed in agony as the chain clattered to the ground after a precise blow to the man's wrist. "You're going to regret that cup," Jack said, gripping his arm as Rocco's sneer wavered slightly as he turned to meet the next threat. As the gang advanced, he roared and signaled for his men to fight. Jack engaged in combat with a controlling fury. Each punch and kick was vicious and effective due to his training and intuition. Despite his best attempts, the numbers started to overwhelm him, and a blow fell on his. Jack didn't falter as Max sensed that his shoulder was touching his ribs. The dog leaped into action, disregarding his wounded, and pounced at his mate. A gang member yelled as one of the attackers used a strong dose to clamp down on the man's arm in an attempt to shake Max off. However, the dog remained steadfast, and Jack was moved by Max's resistance. With newfound tenacity, he defeated another assailant by blocking a strike intended for his gang leader with a broken pipe. Was unrelenting, but so was he, and in the confusion, Rocco slipped away in the direction of the. Jack's keen eyes noticed the movement of shadows whispering commands into a radio. Max fell back. Jack ordered him to retreat toward a pile of troops, and his heart plummeted. Despite his wounds, the dog hobbled to his side as Jack regrouped in the boxes, his eyes still flaming with defiance. His radio sprang to life as he crouched next to Max, and Unit 23 backed up his incoming ETA-3. Jack muttered to Max, "You're going to be fine, buddy," rubbing the 3 minutes that seemed like an eternity. Max's confidence in Jack was unfazed by the sound of his dog's head whining softly. Jack was interrupted by footsteps as he looked up to see Rocco returning with 4 additional gang members on either side of him. Officer Rocco sneered as they went away, heavily armed, their weapons gleaming in the faint light. "Now you and your." Jack's grasp clenched on the shattered pipe in his hand as his mind raced, calculating his next move. "We're going to pay." Max's life relied on him, so he couldn't let them win here or now. Jack took a deep breath before making his stand as the gang closed in. The odds were against him, but he had faced impossible circumstances in the past, not only for himself but also for Max, justice, and "Let's dance," Jack whispered as he stood up, remembering all the innocent people who relied on them to keep the streets safe. With their weapons lifted and sly smiles plastered on their faces, the group surrounded Jack and Max. The tension in every second seemed to drag out forever, and although Jack was aware that he was outnumbered, retreat wasn't in. "Rocco," Jack remarked, his voice hard and low. "Option not with Max injured and more lives at stake last chance." The weariness seeping into his muscles. "Leave while you can." Rocco laughed, which was a frigid and annoying sound. Rocco quickly motioned his guys to advance, and Jack prepared himself, thinking, "You're in control here, cop. This is my world." Himself firmly clutching the shattered pipe. But when the group charged forward and the police backup was cut off by an ear-splitting siren, and the gang lost their. With the sound of car doors slamming and red and blue lights flashing through the factory's damaged windows, momentum was stopped. As the sound of heavy boots striking the concrete reverberated outside, Jack's radio crackled his precinct's voice once more. "We are on site, Officer Mason, and Sergeant is coming through loud and clear. Hold your." Jack experienced a wave of position relief, but only briefly because he knew the gang wouldn't surrender without a struggle. "Rocco's." He yelled for backup because he thought it would change anything, but Jack didn't answer. Instead, a snarl replaced the smile. Adjusted his position in anticipation of what he knew would be a bloody confrontation, and the gang members looked at each other uneasily. One of them whispered, brandishing a crowbar, "Maybe we should bail," as their confidence faltered as the sirens became louder. Tight cops won't play nice, but Rocco wasn't prepared to let anyone down. "Leaves," he growled, his eyes blazing with rage, and we were done before Jack could respond. Rocco pulled out a revolver and pointed it at him. The room appeared to. Jack's heart was racing as he planned his next course of action. There was no time to duck, no cover to protect him. Or, this was it, Max. The factory door exploded open, and a group of officers barged in, shattering the tension. Weapons drawn, "Freeze, drop, drop," their commander yelled, echoed off the walls of the factory. Rocco hesitated for a moment, and Jack only required quick. Jack knocked the rifle out of Rocco's grasp as he threw the broken pipe at him. Chaos broke out as the weapon clattered to the ground, scattering the group as some tried to run away and others charged at the officers in a desperate attempt to avoid arrest. The workplace turned into a haze of activity as yells, fights, and as the sound of gunfire filled the air. Jack remained near Max, protecting the dog as much as he could while assisting them. When authorities noticed that Rocco was losing control, he made a last-ditch effort to flee by running toward a side exit, but Jack was quicker, so he attacked Rocco to ignore his body agony. Jack snarled, his voice heavy with the power of the ground crushing him, leaving no space for resistance. Rocco resisted authorities, but Jack persisted until another policeman showed up to handcuff the gang leader because Rocco was. He wrenched away his enraged eyes and spat you, saying, "You'll pay for this, Mason." And Jack, you're mute, didn't flinch because he has heard it all before, with the backup securing the area and the gang being subdued. At last, Jack returned his focus to Max, who was laying on the ground, breathing steadily but shallowly. Jack asked the officer, who was kneeling next to them with a first aid box, how he was doing. His voice was suddenly lower and tinged with concerned. The police closely inspected Max and found that, like his trainer, he's tough. Jack let out a breath. He didn't know where he'd been holding well, but he'll come through even though he'll need some stitches. He stroked the dog's head and whispered, "You're such a great partner, Max." Jack sat next to Max as his fatigue finally caught up with him as the adrenaline started to wear off. The factory was now under, with the illicit weapons collected and the gang members in custody, but Jack was still burdened by Rocco's. One of the officers came up and gave Jack some words, or acknowledged that the struggle was far from done. Jack nodded and took a sip of the bottle of water. "I'll live," he said. The officer responded, "The gang is all accounted for. Rocco will be answering a." Jack nodded, but his attention was on the several questions we'll make sure he doesn't see the light of day for a long time. Although Max, the dog's bravery and devotion, had once again saved lives, Jack was unable to overlook the toll it had taken on his partner. He silently committed to doing everything in his power to make sure Max received the attention and relaxation he needed. Deserved as the police presence outside grew more intense as the chaos inside the factory faded. Officers seized the gang members in waiting squad vehicles, took pictures of the scene, and documented the evidence. But Jack had eyes just for Max. The dog was still, his sides gently rising and sinking. When the thrill of the moment gave way to fatigue, a paramedic with a stretcher came over, her face a mix of, "Officer Mason, we may examine Max in greater detail back at the station's medical unit because of his professionalism and compassion." Jack nodded and put his palm on Max's head, saying, "Thanks, but he'll be in good hands." The paramedic grinned. "I'm staying with him. He's more than just a partner. He's family. Naturally, let's gently make him comfortable." Before they carefully moved Max onto the stretcher, and Jack watched over his. Other cops gave him space and understood the unspoken, but his presence provided his injured buddy with constant reassurance. Relationship between a handler and his canine partner Ramirez, Jack's old buddy and co-worker, approached a. "We have enough weapons here to outfit a small force, so Rocco and his thugs are safe." Clipboard in hand, the does going. Jack's jaw clenched well for a field day, but Rocco isn't finished yet. He will arrive. Ramirez cocked an eyebrow in response to me, saying, "What's different this time?" "You faced threats before, Jack." Jack looked at Max, and his face was grim. This time, he targeted Max because he knew how to. Ramirez put a hand on Jack's shoulder, and then we made sure he didn't get the chance to hit me where it hurts. "Got the precinct behind you. We'll protect Max." Jack nodded slightly. Although Max was grateful for the support, he was aware that the battle was far from over back at the station. Dr. Elena Vaughn, the unit's veterinarian, welcomed Jack with her customary composure. Manner, yet her eyes showed worry for Jack, who is stable, but I have to clean, and Jack remained at Max's side while Elena was being treated for these wounds. There is no indication of internal damage, but it will take time for him to recover. Elena grinned as she worked, whispering to the dog, "You're tough, buddy. You're tougher than me." "He's in good hands, Jack. You've trained him well, and it's evident that he didn't panic despite being hurt like Max was." Jack was sedated for the procedure, and as his fatigue set in, he leaned against the wall and reenacted the events of. His recollection of the day was carved with every detail of Rocco's sneer and the gang's taunting. The letter made it apparent that they were now after Max as well as him, while Rocco was in. Despite the circumstances, he displayed a defiant demeanor in an interrogation room surrounded by 2 officers and a detective. "You think this is over?" he hissed, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "You'll lock me up, but I've got relationships." Mason won't understand what happened to him because Sarah Chun, a seasoned detective, didn't step up to the going for Mason's dog was a mistake, she remarked, adding that you overestimated the might of that team. Sarah leaned forward as Rocco laughed. "A dog and a washed-up cop are nothing. Your operation was recently decimated by that washed-up cop, so you might want to reconsider underestimating." Once more, Rocco's smile wavered for a brief moment before swiftly returning. Jack was sitting in the common area of the precinct, resting back in his chair. Ramirez gave him a cup of coffee at a desk with encouraging coworkers, and another cop set down a tray. Mason Ramirez firmly stated, "You need your strength if you eat sandwiches nearby. You're going to defeat Rocco." Jack smiled a little. "Thank you." But before Ramirez could say anything, my hunger took over. In response, the captain of the precinct showed a mixture of pride and worry, saying, "Mason, you managed. You did great today, but I want you to understand that Rocco made it personal." And Jack looked her in the eye. "I am aware that he pursued Max, which altered everything." The captain nodded, and we alter our strategy. We'll shield Max while he heals and ensure that Rocco and his team don't get another chance, I promise. Jack nodded, reaffirming his vow that we don't. As the night carried on, Jack went back to the scene to defend Max. Medical unit to check on Max, who was conscious but drowsy due to his bandaged wounds. Sharp reminder of what had happened that day, Jack knelt next to him and said, "You did. As always, you are a terrific friend, and together, we will overcome Max's tale." Jack experienced a thrill as his surviving spirit wavered faintly, a tiny but potent sign. Rocco had miscalculated their level of resolve, but he was determined not to make the same mistake twice. The precinct hummed. Tremendous activity as Jack got ready to look more closely at rumors of minor gangs connected to the Rocco operation via Rocco's network were arriving, indicating that the captain's mission for Jack and Ramirez had only just begun to be explored during the day's raid. Even after learning the entire scope of Rocco's influence, Jack couldn't get rid of the persistent suspicion that Rocco was. Max, who was still a few steps ahead, was now sleeping in the station's guarded kennel, which many people were worried about. Even though his physical wounds were healing, the attack had left a lasting impression on everyone, reminding them of how brutal Rocco's team, maybe Jack, who frequently visited Ma, soothing the dog and reviving Jax. Resolve Block 5, add subplots or new obstacles, and write 800 words. The precinct was humming with bustle. Jack was getting ready to investigate Rocco's network further when he heard of minor gangs connected to Rocco's scheme, indicating that the commander had given Jack and Ramirez the responsibility of discovering more, and that the day's raid had only just begun. The full scope of Rocco's impact, Jack was unable to get rid of the persistent impression that Rocco was still numerous. The fact that Max was now sleeping in the station's secure kennel had many cops worried. Even though his physical wounds were healing, the attack had left a lasting impression on everyone, serving as a reminder of how, within Rocco's team, maybe Jack, who frequently paid Max a visit, soothing the dog and reviving Jax. Beside that night, Jack and Ramirez met in the precinct briefing room. A large city map covered the. Ramirez tapped a wall marked with pushpins that appeared to indicate possible gang activity. "We have a lead here at one of the pins close to the industrial sector." Ramirez mentioned that a warehouse that Rocco's crew might have, although we believed it to be abandoned. Used as a drop place, monitoring reveals increased activity over the previous week. Jack's jaw tightened as he examined the map to see if Rocco was still attempting to transport the product. Ramirez hesitated. "But here's the catch. We need to shut it down." "What's the plan?" "Going in blind is dangerous, especially if you're not sure how secure the place is or how many individuals are there." Jack crossed his arms in anticipation of us, his thoughts running, so we wouldn't enter blind. Ramirez scowled. "Who would be insane enough to approach you without drawing suspicion?" After today's events, Jack's eyes strayed to the kennel where Max was lying with a strategy in order to enter Rocco's network. Started to take shape in his thoughts. The following morning, Jack visited Dr. Vaughn in the kennel, and Max greeted him by waving. Jack is next to him, scratching behind his ears as his strength gradually returns. Jack murmured quietly, "You up for a challenge, buddy? We have some unfinished business." "Do VOR." Jack scowled, but he's still. Jack stood there with a determined attitude. "I know Max better than anyone," saying, "Healing whatever you're thinking. It's too soon." Max's ears pricked up, and he pressed his nose into Jack's fingers, as though feeling that he would let me know if he's game. Considering the seriousness of the situation, Dr. Voss sighed. "I can't stop you, but please don't push him too hard that day." Jack and Ramirez came up with a scheme utilizing Max's. They would scout the warehouse perimeter using their extremely skilled tracking abilities to obtain intelligence before committing to a full. A tiny camera would be fastened to Raid Max's harness so that the team could see his discoveries in real time. As they prepared Ramirez, Jack trusted Max's intuition more than any technological advancement, even though the risk was enormous at the moment. Expressed his worries to Jack that Max might be in grave danger if this goes wrong. Jack adjusted Max's strap and made measure motions. "I am aware of the hazards, but Max is the only one who can pull this off." Jack, Ramirez, and a small tactical team arrived at the warehouse while hiding in the darkness, and they parked a block away. Cars out of sight, Jack squatted next to Max and spoke in a steady, quiet, "Okay, buddy, you'll do what you do best and find the bad ones. Stay." When Max's keen eyes focused, his tail waggled. "Low, keep quiet, and return to me." Ramirez placed the control pad for the video stream on Jack's face. "We'll help him from here." Max slipped through. The team watched the live feed, their anxiousness evident as Max moved silently and precisely through a crack in the fence. Traversed the shadowed area, the camera caught glimmers of activity as people unloaded inside the facility. Suddenly, a tremendous clang reverberated through the room. Max, surrounded by crates and stacks of cash, caught his breath as a guard and froze his ears, turning to find the source of the noise. Max dropped low, disappearing into the shadows as his training kicked in, and he came out looking around with a flashlight. "Come on," Max, Jack muttered as he tightened his hold on the control pad. "You got this." The guard continued to walk away, unaware of the. Max started his quest a few feet away, sneaking closer to the open door of the warehouse while the camera feed showed evidence that may destroy Rocco's organization, including heaps of weapons and rows of crates bearing gang emblems. However, Max stopped, tensing up when the crew saw the feed pan reveal there were emaciated, injured, and obviously mistreated pets in a row of cages in the corner. Jack was devastated by Rocco's cruelty, which went beyond people. "We can't wait," Jack's voice said. "Steely, we're going in now." The team is mobilized and moving quickly. Jack's focus stayed on the feed, directing Max towards safety as they made their way discreetly toward the warehouse in preparation for the. Commotion broke out as they entered the building, with screaming, barking, and the sound of. Max cried to me, the dog, as the sound of boots on concrete filled the air. Jack's voice broke through the cacophony, emerged a few moments later, running toward Jack and barking in triumph. They joined the fray with the intention of permanently ending Rocco's reign of terror. The warehouse raid proceeded with accuracy. The police moved through the building like a well-maintained machine. Jack and Max collaborated on there. Despite the cries and gunfire, Max's bond remained unbreakable despite the pandemonium. Moved with restrained resolve, using his keen intuition to steer clear of danger and support his squad as Jack. As he got closer to the line of cages housing the abused dogs, a pang of remorse hit him. These animals were defenseless, and defenseless were the targets of the same brutality that had almost killed Max. He yelled at Ramirez, who was. "We must remove these gang members who are close to Ramirez. They have endured enough suffering." Jogged while admiring the scared and undernourished animals. "You're right. Let's start animal control." Immediately after this, Jack knelt beside one of the cages and whispered to a shaky German shepherd, "You're safe now." Max sat next to him, wagging his tail while he said in a steady, comforting manner, "Gently, As though to deliver the same message as the raid, Drew brought the officers to a halt. Regrouped, a number of gang members, including Rocco's, displayed a mix of triumph and tiredness. The gang's illegal activities were clearly depicted by the evidence seized once the second in command was captured. When Operations Captain Hernandez came on the scene, she approached Jack with a rare look as she took in the team's accomplishment. Her normally stern tone was broken by her smile. "Mason, you and Max did a fantastic job tonight, and this is a huge win for the city as well as the precinct." Jack nodded, looking around. Dr. Vaughn stood close, carefully examining Max, the dog's periphery. "Had come to help with the animals who were rescued." "Thank you, Captain, but Rocco is still out there. Tonight was a significant setback for his operation," and the captain's countenance became serious. "He will eventually make a mistake." Jack's resolve was strengthened by the memory of Max's injuries, which caused him to clench his fists. Later that evening, the crew assembled back at the precinct, and I won't let him get away with what he did. Conference area to discuss the confiscated items and the rescued pets that had been taken to a neighboring shelter. Max's tail was lying on a blanket next to Jack's chair, being recorded as evidence, pounding lightly on the ground every time someone came to commend his courage. Ramirez gave Jack a cup of. "Max is a hero, and you should be proud of him despite his lighthearted tone." Jack raised an eyebrow and questioned, "What look do you have again?" Jack sighed and ran a hand through it, saying, "That says you're not done, that you're already planning your next move." "How can I not notice that Rocco is likely planning his next attack based on his hair?" Ramirez nodded slowly, understanding that you can't just sit back and wait, but you need to pace yourself because Max needs time to recuperate, and so do you. Before Jack could react, Dr. Vaughn came in. She gave Jack a comforting grin while holding a folder of medical data, saying, "Max is healing well, but he'll need a few weeks." Jack looked at Max and nodded, his face softening as he thanked him for the rest before he returns to full strength. Dr. Vaughn paused before adding, "I'll make sure he gets the care he needs. Document." "Jack, Max trusts you to make the correct choices, so don't let your anger cloud your judgment. I know you're driven." Her comments resonated with you both, and Jack nodded once more with greater solemnity. As the precinct slowed down for the evening, "Jack, it's nice to hear you, Doctor." The day's events were replayed in his memory while he sat by himself in the kennel with Max, each second strengthening his resolve. His voice was low as he scratched behind Max's ears. "We've gone through worse, haven't we? How? But it feels different now because Rocco isn't just another thug." Personal Max put his head on Jack's lap, and Jack felt a sense of absolute trust. He leaned down and said, "Well," feeling a wave of appreciation for the dog that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Finish this, Max, together," while Rocco sat in a poorly lit room on the other side of the city. His second-in-command's capture had upset him, but his face was veiled by the faint glimmer of a desk lamp. Rocco said in a low voice that his anger overcame his dread that they had triumphed. "And poisonous. But Mason is unsure of the person he is playing with as he hesitates at the door. Boss, what's the—" We struck Rocco where it hurts the most, and his lips curved into a sinister sneer. Although everyone has a breaking point, he believes he is untouchable. Bart. The gang member nodded uneasily. "But what about the dog?" Rocco grinned broadly, his eyes shining maliciously. "Oh, we'll deal with." Jack's phone buzzed at the precinct, "So we'll make Mason watch the dog first." A notice appeared on the screen with a message from an unidentified number and a blurry picture of Max's kennel. The writing that went with it said, "You should have avoided this, Mason." Now that it's personal, Jack's blood ran cold. Jack's heart raced as he gazed at the menacing message on his phone, but the game was far from finished. When he saw the picture of Max's kennel, he instantly checked to be sure the sender wasn't kidding on Max, but the dog continued to sleep contentedly at his feet, unaware of the impending threat. Jack tightened his jaw, his mind racing. This wasn't merely a threat. Rather, it was Rocco's deliberate maneuver to get. Jack immediately sent the message to Captain Hernandez and Ramirez in his mind, adding a quick. He stood suddenly, surprising Max, who woke up and said, "Note, we have a serious problem. I need backup at the precinct." Jack followed him as he started to pace the room, and a few minutes later, Ramirez suddenly entered with a worried frown. With resoluteness, Jack sent a message to him in a low, strained voice. "Rocco knows where we This isn't just a gang vendetta longer. He's attempting to break me. And he's coming for Max as well as for me. Ramirez scowled as he read the note, thinking, this man is playing dirty, but if he's reaching out, it indicates that he's desperate, so we may take advantage of that. Jack nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. If Rocco is making mistakes, we should send Max somewhere secure. Is reached, his voice became stuck, and he shook his head, refusing to complete the thought. At that moment, Captain Hernandez has. A sense of urgency replaced her normally calm manner. I've already informed the team we're locking, she said, down the precinct and getting Max. But Jack, you should carefully consider your next course of action to see whether Rocco is willing to go. He can accomplish anything thus far. Jack looked into his eyes, steely. I'm not going to back down. Captain Max is more than simply a partner. He's family. And I won't allow Rocco to prevail because the precinct entered lockdown. Jack remained near Max, keeping his protective instincts at high alert while the other officers put in endless effort to bolster security. But Jack couldn't get rid of the suspicion that Rocco had grander plans for every creek. Dr. Vaugh came, and every shadow in the room's corners felt like a potential threat because of the flooring. Her face turned pale as she walked up to Jack shortly after. And I heard about the threat. Is Max all right? He's fine for the time being, Jack. I don't trust that Rocco won't try something. He's already crossed too many lines, he said in a tense voice. Vaugh knelt down and softly stroked Max's fur. Jack, you should consider. Perhaps it's time to think about relocating Max to a secure institution, at least until this is resolved, Jack. The idea that his protective instincts were resurfacing made him furious. I'm not sending him away. He stays with me, Dr. Vaugh groaned, but didn't press the matter. Instead, he assured me that he would be secure while Rocco gathered across the city. Mason believes he's angry as he strode back and forth among his remaining adherents in a poorly illuminated warehouse. Untouchable, but he will soon realize that if he doesn't, that dog of his is his vulnerability, so we take him. One of his men paused before saying, Boss, hitting a cop's dog is risky and will make us Rocco more angry. I'm not asking for opinions, so we moved to the night when the gang started, and he immediately stopped pacing and glaring, silencing the man. With their guns shining in the flickering fluorescent lights, they were getting ready for their attack. Rocco's strategy was violent but straightforward infiltration of the precinct, capture Max, and leave a lasting message for Jack back at the. There was tension in the precinct, but Ramirez remained at Jack's side as usual. Somber focus in place of a light-hearted manner. Thus, what's the plan? We can't. Jack looked at Max, who was lying comfortably at his feet, apparently oblivious to anything. Just sit here and wait for Rocco to make his move. If Rocco is coming for me, we utilize it to entice him away, but we must reverse the risk. We've established a perimeter around the precinct, and Captain Hernandez joined them with her arms crossed, saying, Be ready for anything. Called in reinforcements. But are you certain that you're using Max's bait for this, Jack? Jack's jaw tensed. It's a dangerous move, but the only way to stop this Rocco is. He's underestimating Max and us, but he won't stop until he has what he wants. The lights of the precinct created long shadows across the deserted street as night fell. Inside, the officers were ready for an ambush, and Jack from the perimeter team was providing them with information on their radios. Remain near Max, his heart racing with a mixture of terror and resolve, until the sound of glass breaking broke. Reverberated throughout the building, Jack's instincts took over and he knelt down, indicating to Max to remain near the. With their firearms drawn, officers rushed to close the hole through the confusion. Jack saw a silhouette moving in the darkness. It was Rocco, and he was as terrifying as ever. When your eyes locked, time appeared to stop for a second. You shouldn't have. Mason Rocco snarled, his voice brimming with hate. Messed with me. Jack's hold. Rocco, you made it personal by tightening his weapon, and now you'll pay for it. Rocco gave his men a signal as the tension neared a breaking point, and they started pouring smoke into the precinct. Grenades. The pungent stench of burning chemicals filled the air, and the officers fought to keep their positions through the fog. Jack maintained his attention on Max and spoke steadily while giving orders. Stay tight, buddy, we've got this. Max growled in response, his keen intuition slicing through the confusion as they ready for the. battle of their lives. The mayhem within the precinct grew more intense, and the smoke grew thicker, making it nearly impossible to see. A clamor of danger was produced by the faraway yells and the crackling sound of broken glass. But Jack's focus stayed razor-sharp, with Max at his side, his body tight and prepared even. Jack was led to safety by the retiring warg's keen instincts through the fog. Jack yelled into his radio, "There's movement on the west side," and Ramirez's voice could be heard clearly. Several targets are being breached by the static, and Jack's grasp tightened as he looked at Max. While Captain Hernandez coordinated the officers, her voice broke through to say, "We're not going to let them get through." The commotion in the cave is concentrated on containment. Nobody enters past the inner perimeter, and people are kept out of harm's way despite the overwhelming odds. Hernandez is calm, but firm officers stuck to their training. As the squad methodically repelled the invaders, Dr. Vaughn's commanding tone helped them stay focused. Remained behind to keep an eye on Max, and ended up in an unplanned command post alongside Captain Hernandez, although it was clearly she helped out by providing medical knowledge and keeping an eye on the security streams they were dividing into. While the others are heading, one group is creating a distraction by pointing at the screens. For Max, Hernandez sadly nodded. Rocco is aware of what he's doing and is relying on. Since we were too dispersed to react appropriately back in the thick of things, Jack and Max walked down hallways Despite the years that have passed since Max's active service, the two of them continue to work as a cohesive team. Was apparent in every action he took. He stood close to Jack, his keen eyes searching the surroundings for dangers, and then Max reacted as a person with a crowbar sprang toward Jack from the shadows. Jack swiftly disarmed the assailant with a precise action as his strong jaws clamped down on his arm. Locked the man, his gaze flitting to Max, and he nodded appreciatively. "Good boy." Elsewhere, Ramirez and a group of officers confronted another group of Rocco's men in the precinct. The gangs launched a coordinated attack, put the officers' determination to the test, but Ramirez's cunning and fast thinking maintained his team one step ahead. They were able to separate and hold a number of intruders by taking use of the building's layout. "We're keeping them at bay, Jack, but you must make sure Max Ramirez's voice is secure." Jack's stomach clenched as they made a strong drive toward the kennel area over the radio, knowing that Max was As Jack and Max headed into the kennel area, Target and Rocco refused to stop until he received what he desired. Saw more of Rocco's men. Each encounter put Max's devotion and Jack's determination to the test despite the pandemonium. Their relationship was evident in Jack's clear-cut and unambiguous orders, to which Max replied with unflinching accuracy. They once came upon 3 gang members trying to break through Max growled softly as his body coiled like a spring inside the reinforced door of the kennel. Jack gave Max a single order, and Max rushed forward with a whirlwind of his strong words. When one of the intruders was tackled, the others screamed and threw their guns to the ground in an attempt to repel Jack, a determined dog, came in swiftly and used measured precision to neutralize the remaining threats while Rocco. He was clearly frustrated as he saw the mayhem from a concealed vantage point and recognized it as guys. He clenched his fists, his thoughts racing for a way to change the course as we were being methodically outmaneuvered. "If I can't take Max, I'll make sure Mason pays another way," he murmured to himself. Rocco's attention turned to with a sly grin, he devised a scheme to turn the building's power supply off in the hopes of creating further perplexity and provide his men with the advantage as the lights flickered menacingly. Jack's radio crackled with Hernandez, Jack has warned us that there's a problem. Rocco's men are pursuing Jack clenched his jaw, and we're on our way there now. If they remove the electrical system, we'll lose surveillance and containment. Keep me informed about Jack's quick progress through the precinct, with Max leading the way. His steadfast resolve meant that his relationship with Max was more than just a handler-dog relationship. It was a collaboration, founded on devotion and trust that were formed in the furnace of hardship. They discovered Rocco himself when they arrived at the power grid. When the gang boss in charge of the sabotage spotted Jack and Max, his confidence briefly wavered, but he soon recovered, pulling out a knife and sneering as he moved closer. Well, Mason, You've been a pain in my side for too long. Let's get this over with." Jack raised his firearm, spoke in a calm but forceful tone, and moved away. Rocco laughed, his voice brimming with derision. "This doesn't have to end badly for you. You believe. You're just a reformed police officer hiding behind a mud, so you can stop me." However, before Rocco could approach further, Max roared his. Jack gave the gang leader a single order to guard Max while his keen eyes were fixed on him. Jack shifted in his weapon-trained position as Ward pushed forward, forcing Rocco to back off. Tension in the room as Jack and Max squared off against the gang boss as he summoned reinforcements. The gang boss, now cornered, wore a sly smile that concealed his frustration against Rocco and his remaining adherents. Behind him, his troops paused, their self-assurance shattered by Max's fierce snarl and Jack's uncompromising posture. Mason Rocco snarled in his venomous voice, "You have guts, but guts won't." Jack's voice was steady, his goal steadfast, and he didn't need arrogance to save you. The gang leader grinned darkly, his palm tightening. "Surrender now, and this ends without anyone else getting hurt. You believe you've already won, but this dog won't be enough, and you're outnumbered." Flash officer, around the knife he carried. Max barked loudly to protect you before Rocco could move on. Jack changed his focus just in time to see one of Rocco's guys grasping for a weapon, indicating an imminent threat. With lightning-fast reflexes and a concealed weapon, he fired a warning shot through the gap of the sound of the gun reverberated throughout the room, making the potential assailant freeze. "Stand down," Jack yelled, carrying the weight of authority. "You're only making things worse for yourself." Max took the initiative and made enough of an impression to maintain the gang members obeyed despite the danger. His devotion to Jack was steadfast, a connection created over years of collaboration and innumerable struggles against hardship. All of a sudden the lights flickered and disappeared, leaving the room in almost complete darkness. Rocco's strategy to the precinct's electrical grid had been successfully sabotaged, and the unexpected blackout allowed his men to reassemble Jack's. His other senses were more acute as his heart raced as he adapted to the darkness. "Stay close, Max," he muttered. He positioned himself protectively by Jack's side as the retired WOG's training began, barely audible. As they gingerly made their way into the chamber, using their instincts and memories, Rocco's voice could be heard above the confusion. "Teasing and making fun of you, Mason, because you're blind now, just like this pitiful mutt. How do you intend to combat what you cannot see?" Jack chose to ignore the provocation in order to keep his concentration on control of the circumstance. He reached for his radio and spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "What's your status, Ramirez Hernandez?" The response pierced the. Hernandez said, "Static. We're securing the perimeter, but we've lost visual feeds." "Do you need backup?" Negative, Jack stated unequivocally. "We have Rocco cornered as Jack and Max, so concentrate on containment." As Rocco's men moved through the dimly lit chamber, they heard hushed whispers and shuffling feet. "We're attempting to shift in an attempt to have the upper hand," but Max's keen senses picked up on every motion, and his roar alerted anyone who ventured too close with a dazzling flash of light that illuminated the room as one of. When the gang members lit a flare, Rocco's location became briefly visible, and Jack took advantage of the moment by moving. Jack ordered the gang leader to drop the dagger as quickly as possible, his voice piercing the turmoil, but Rocco wasn't about to give up, so he went toward Jack with a fierce roar. Time seemed to slow as Max leaped into action, fiercely blocking the attack with his blade aimed at the officer's breast. That left Rocco speechless. The conflict was fierce, and Jack was able to gain control at every turn. Max continued to be there with his growls as he disarmed Rocco, the knife clattering to the ground as the two men struggled, and barks holding the rest of the gang at bay. Jack eventually took control and pinned Rocco to the ground. As he grabbed for his shackles, his voice was composed yet firm. "Rocco, you have nowhere to lead the gang. It's over." The leader looked up at Jack and said, "You think this changes anything?" His confidence ultimately gave way to defeat. Jack's reaction was steely as he said, "Maybe, but tonight you're done. There is always another Rocco waiting in the wings." Max stood watch, his eyes penetrating, while Jack restrained Rocco and summoned assistance. When they saw their leader being subdued, the other gang members started to surrender one by one, daring anyone to challenge them. Shortly after, Ramirez and Hernandez showed up, confirming the precinct's command of the situation. "Well done," Mason Hernandez replied in a tone that was both relieved and appreciative of you, and Jack nodded, his attention firmly focused on making sure the area was safe. Max had just rescued this precinct, and most likely much more. Secure, without the team, we couldn't have succeeded, he added, turning to face Max, who was tonight's true hero. Jack gave himself permission to take a time to think as the lights were turned back on, and the precinct was put back in order. Although night had put him to the test in unexpected ways, he and Max had overcome it together and are now stronger than before. As he was being carried away in handcuffs, Rocco murmured, "Isn't over." Mason Jack met his stare and unflinchingly said, "You'll pay for this." The precinct was now under control after you attempted and failed, but the adrenaline from the tense standoff. Officers acted quickly to secure the area so that no gang members could flee or cause more disturbances. Jack silently expressed his gratitude for his partner's persistent support by standing close to Max and placing his hand on the dog's head. Well, but things were far from finished since there was a disturbance in the garage as Rocco was taken into a holding cell. Ramirez's voice crackled over the radio jack underneath the precinct, and we have a problem. Jack's jaw tensed as Rocco's armed reinforcements arrived and barred the exit. At least 10 heavily armed, Ramirez responded, saying that if we don't release Rocco, they'll storm the. Jack's thoughts were racing since the precinct wasn't designed to survive the siege, particularly not from a well-armed gang. He looked at Max, who was sitting alertly with his ears perked up as though he could sense the danger. They had an unspoken but deep link and were both aware of the stakes. Jack told everyone to go to the secure areas and to stay off the radio unless it was absolutely necessary. "I'll take care of that." Hernandez showed up by his side, and her face made it clear that they were working as a team and that Jack wasn't doing this alone. His head, "Thank you. But this isn't just about stopping them. It's also about ensuring that Rocco doesn't go. They will anticipate force here, so we must outsmart them." Max growled, grabbing Jack's attention, and the dog's eyes were riveted on. Jack followed his eyes to a neighboring ventilation shaft, and a thought started to emerge if Hernandez indicated a plan was developing and that since they were concentrating on the garage, we might have an opportunity to flank them. "Little crew, I'll use the vent system to support them." But Max Hernandez was hesitant because he knew you were at risk, certain that they won't interrupt you if they catch you. "But if we don't?" Hernandez nodded as he gave the rest of the team instructions to act immediately, or they will breach the precinct. As Jack and Max carried out their strategy, they coordinated their positions to divert the group. Jack took off his equipment, retaining. Max moved silently and precisely, using just his sidearm and a headlamp to navigate the small conduits. The ventilation system was small and dim, and Jack's pulse was quietly echoed by the metallic clang of every stride. Accelerated as they got closer to the vent opening over the garage. Jack counted the gang members while looking through the slats. Ramirez was right when he said that 10 guys with firearms had ringed the garage, obstructing the exits with their cars. Jack said to Max in a low, assured tone, "Stay closer," as they were yelling demands and their voices were resonating menacingly. "We must go quickly and carefully, buddy." Precision Jack took off the vent cover and dropped quietly upon a stack. Max followed, landing gently behind the crates, and now they were in the darkness behind the gang. Jack gestured to Max, who approached with a low growl that was hardly audible. One of the. Sensing movement, the gang members turned, but Max attacked before he could respond, knocking the weapon out of his hands, and Jack got the opportunity he needed when the gang noticed the sudden noise, which pinned him to the ground. Came out of the shadows with his weapon drawn on the close assailant. "Drop your weapons now," he said, briefly slicing through the confusion. The group paused, unsure of how to react. However, their hesitancy was brief since one of them brandished his weapon, which caused Jack to fire a warning shot. Jack warned that the next one won't miss the harsh sound that bounced off the concrete floor and reverberated through the garage. Max hissed in a tone that was icy and uncompromising, and his presence gave Jack's. The group exchanged nervous looks as they spoke, their confidence ebbing. They hadn't anticipated such a daring. Before the group could reassemble, Hernandez and her squad launched a counterattack, particularly not from a man and his dog. Their weapons were drawn from the other side, and she yelled, "This is your final opportunity. Give up now or face the consequences." When the gang realized they were encircled, Jack and Hernandez started to drop their weapons one by one, swiftly disarmed them, and tied their hands with zip ties, ending the standoff, although the threat hadn't. Rocco's soldiers had been completely defeated, but their captain remained unflinching, his smug smile still intact as he observed from his detention cell how you believe that anything he said will change, but you've merely postponed the inevitable. Jack walked calmly but resolutely toward the cell. "You're correct, Rocco. Even if this isn't over, you've lost tonight. Your men are being held, and after the procedure, you'll be in prison for the rest of your life if you're lucky." Rocco's smile wavered and was replaced by as the gang members were led away, he appeared to realize the extent of his defeat for the first time. Jack was leaning against the wall while under heavy watch, and Max was sitting next to him with his tail. Exhaustion was starting to set in, swaying a little in tacit recognition of their triumph, as the precinct became quieter following the tumultuous standoff. Jack was standing by himself in the garage with Max, and the rush of excitement in his body had dwindled, replacing it with a wave of fatigue, but there was no time to relax. Jack was haunted by Rocco's arrogant threats, which served as a warning that Hernandez's fight was far from done. "We got all his men locked up," she added, her expression showing equal parts relief and worry. "But Rocco's?" "Yes, someone like him doesn't give up easily." Jack nodded, his jaw clenched, "and he wasn't merely threatening me." Max growled low, sensing Jack's menace to everyone in this city. Uncomfortable, their relationship was unquestionable. Jack knelt next to his companion and met the dog's keen stare. "Are we done yet, buddy Max?" He gave a slight, tail-wagging motion as though, when I said, "Let's finish this," the precinct electricity abruptly flickered, lowering the station into momentary darkness. A few seconds later, the buzz of backup generators began, but the brief blackout was sufficient. Jack's radio sprang to life, causing everyone to get tense. We also noticed activity outside. Ramirez's voice sounded tight, as if someone were attempting to enter the perimeter. Hernandez and Jack had "Look," she replied coldly. "It's Rocco's backup plan. He must have backup waiting." Jack signaled for Max to follow him by grabbing his equipment and letting go. "We won't allow them to take him outside since the situation had gotten out of hand and a bunch of men with guns were. They made an attempt to breach the precinct's fence, making it obvious that they were there to free Rocco and wouldn't think twice about it." Jack and Max quickly moved to the side of the group, surrounding Hernandez and her, in order to use violence to accomplish their purpose. They maintained the front line, causing a distraction that made it possible for Jack to take his place without Max's training being recognized. Began when Jack delivered a silent signal, and the dog moved silently and precisely in a flash. Max pounced on the closest intruder, clamping down on the man's arm with his strong teeth. The ruckus caught the attention of the others, but Jack and Hernandez's group arrived too late to stop the battle. Was fierce but brief, with the gang's reinforcements being unprepared for the assailants' well-practiced precision. For Max's unmatched intuition and the precinct's officers' coordinated response in just a few minutes. As the final intruder was captured, the attackers were disarmed and detained, and their attempt to save Rocco was foiled. Jack, who was taken into custody, looked around the scene, breathing heavily, and the precinct was secure. And Rocco watched as Rocco's empire suffered yet another terrible blow. Through his holding cell's barred window, his once assured manner has changed to one of obvious dissatisfaction. "You think you've won, Taylor? This isn't over." He pounded his fist against the glass, his voice resonating through the corridor. Jack walked calmly up to the cell, but he was certain. "You're right, Rocco. It's not over yet because you're going to." Max stood next to Jack, his eyes fixed on Rocco as though he comprehended the need to face justice for everything you've done. The dog's presence served as a reminder of the strength and loyalty that had sustained them throughout the night, and the precinct finally. Safe Jack gave himself permission to pause and crouch next to Max, holding his hand. He remarked quietly, "We tried to rest on the dog's head. Break us, but we resisted." Max snarled softly and waggled his tail. In return, their unshakable relationship was created by innumerable Alice and triumphs like this one. Jack experienced a renewed sense of energy as the sun rose, bathing the city in a warm glow. Sense of purpose. The night's events had put him to the test in unexpected ways, but they had also strengthened. Jack responded, standing and guiding Max toward the door. "Let's head back in," demonstrating his dedication to his duty and the people he served. Although they had more work to do, they could now feel proud of what they had managed to do inside the precinct. The aftermath of the night's tumult was illuminated by the morning light that seeped through the high windows. Officers worked to gather evidence and process the intruders who had been apprehended. Jack sat in the break room. Max at his. There was a mixture of relief and excitement in the air, and both of them were clearly tired yet alert. Rocco was in. Hernandez entered the room with a cup of coffee, but his threats still loomed over the station like a thunder cloud. Jack started up with a cautious tone, holding a file in one hand and Rocco's. "Attorneys are already submitting motions to release him on bond, arguing that there is insufficient proof that Jack set his coffee. We caught him red-handed with sufficient proof, despite his furrowed brow," Hernandez retorted. "It's not just about what we found. We need witnesses to arm a small militia." When Ramirez showed up in the doorway, there were more people ready to come forward and testify against him. He motioned for Jack and Hernandez to follow the three of them as they made their way to the. Rocco stood smugly behind the glass in the interrogation room, while his lawyer whispered angrily in his ear, Despite his terrible circumstances, Rocco seemed confident and a man who believed in. "Ramirez said he had information you should hear, Jack, and he's demanding to talk to you. He calls himself untouchable." Hernandez and Max exchanged a tired look before Max entered the room, his gaze never leaving. When Jack sat down opposite the infamous gangster, Rocco, the tension in the room was evident. "What do you want?" With a chilly and uncompromising tone, Rocco Jack asked, leaning back in his chair with a cunning smile on his face. "Calm down, Taylor. I'm only here to make. You made an offer, but Jack rejected it, saying you're not in a position to negotiate." Rocco's smile grew. You see, I have strong connections, so you let me leave here and, with money in the bank and a property on the seaside, I'll make sure you and your dog can live happily in retirement. Work another day in your life." Jack's fingers clenched beneath the table, his jaw tightening. The offer's audacity was. "You think you can buy me," he remarked in a low voice, but the implications were deadly serious. "Risky given everything you've done and what your men did to Max." Rocco. He shrugged, his face unconcerned. "Taylor, everyone has a price, even you." Jack jumped up suddenly, scraping his chair. Jack glanced to the floor and said, "Rocco, no amount of money or power will change the fact that you're going to rot in prison." After he left, Rocco called, his tone mocking, "You think this is over? I'm not going to pay for this, you." When Jack heard those words, it was like a kick to the gut. But he left the room, Max following closely, and returned without letting Rocco see anything. Outside, Hernandez and Ramirez are attempting to reassure you. Hernandez said to put a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. "Don't allow him to nod. His determination is growing. We must create an ironclad case later that day. I'm not going to allow him to get away with it." An anonymous tip provided the breakthrough, and a woman's shaky, quiet voice disclosed that she had previously participated in Rocco's activities, but had left after seeing his brutality up close. But she consented to came forward as a witness, and her account painted a terrifying portrait of the criminal empire that Rocco had established as. Jack was hopeful when her statements were captured on tape and transcribed, since this was the type of proof they required to demolish Rocco's network permanently in the interim. In the meantime, Max was visited by the precinct's veterinarian, who carried out an exhaustive examination and gave him a clean bill of health, saying that he is tough like his trainer. The veterinarian grinned as Jack squatted down. Max responded, "We're not done yet, buddy," while lovingly massaging his ears. "But we're getting closer." Hernandez oversaw a flurry of activity in the last hours of the day as the precinct prepared its case. Ramirez found further clues with the help of prosecutors, and Jack put in a lot of effort to gather all of the evidence they possessed. The team assembled in the briefing room as midnight approached, and their resolve. Unwaveringly, Jack told the gathering, "This isn't just about taking down Rocco. It's about delivering a message that nobody is above the law, and we can overcome anything if we band together." A chorus of agreement broke out in the room, demonstrating their shared resolve and the closeness they had as. Max, one of the law enforcement officers, echoed their sentiments by barking once, earning a. Jack sat in a strained but hopeful silence while the precinct settled into a round of laughter that lifted the stifling mood. With his hand on the dog's back next to Max, they had overcome insurmountable obstacles and come out on top. Jack was stronger as a result, and even if the future was still unclear, he was convinced that they weren't merely. As dawn broke, they were partners who were a team and could handle anything as long as they had each other. After months of arduous labor, the precinct buzzed with cautious optimism over the city, having developed a case powerful enough to overthrow Rocco and his whole business, including witness accounts, tangible proof, and financial documents. Depicted in detail the criminal empire he had built and the measures he had taken to keep it safe. Max sat obediently at Jack's side as he stood in the middle of the briefing room, surrounded by his fellow cops. His presence say, the crew went over the last preparations for the court hearing later that day, which was reassuring. Tension and confidence coexisted as they got ready for what would be a crucial hour in their struggle for justice. Later, the gallery was full and the courtroom was packed due to the seriousness of the case garnering media attention, with reporters, interested bystanders, and even locals who had endured hardships during Rocco's rule. Max, Jack's faithful dog, drew everyone's attention and admiration as he entered the room. The prosecutor started their opening statement by clearly and precisely outlining the evidence against Rocco. Witnesses were called, each of them offering incriminating information that strengthened the accusations. The unnamed witness was a former co-worker of Rocco's, gave a very moving account of the violence and terror that characterized his organization. When Jack's turn to testify came, he stood quietly determined, and his words were calm and straightforward as he described the attack on Max, his interactions with Rocco and his guys, and the terrifying incidents. On the night that they ultimately took him into custody, Max, ever vigilant, a living representation of their Rocco's smug attitude persisted throughout the proceedings, but cracks started to appear as the evidence mounted. His attorney's arguments became more vehement, and it became evident that their defense was. As the trial came to a head, the judge, unable to handle the reality, ordered a break before Jack and Max left the cool breeze to deliver the decision, providing a much-needed break from the ferocity of. Hernandez entered the courtroom and offered Jack a cautious look. "I hope you did well in there," she murmured. Rare smile, Jack nodded, his palm resting on Max's head, and said, "Regardless of what happens, we've done everything." The tension in the air was evident when the court reconvened and the judge started speaking, stable and commanding. It is evident from examining the material and testimony that the defendant Rocco. The courtroom exploded in a mixture of pleasure and joy when it was revealed that Mark Eli was guilty of all the counts against him. Jack had a wave of emotion as justice was finally being done and a dangerous criminal was being made responsible for his deeds. Jack was met outside the courthouse as he looked down at Max, whose tail was waving slightly as though he sensed the victory, by a small group of supporters, which included other officers and community people. Reporters demanded interviews, but Jack's attention was still on Max, so he spoke while kneeling next to his teammate. Gently, "We succeeded, friend," and in the days that followed, life started to return. Things returned to normal. The precinct commemorated their triumph and recognized the sacrifices and hard labor that it brought. From Rocco to justice, Jack and Max rose to prominence as local heroes in their inspirational tale. Others in reiterating the value of tenacity and cooperation. But for Jack, the real prize was the relationship he shared. Together with Max, they had encountered peril, uncertainty, and seemingly insurmountable odds, and collectively they had come out stronger, demonstrating that bravery and devotion could prevail despite of darkness. Jack felt a renewed feeling of purpose as he thought back on the trip. His collaboration with Max was more than just a professional partnership. It was evidence of the strength of faith and perseverance. And as they got ready for their next duty, Jack was aware of the difficulties they would encounter. Them side by side, this tale of bravery, devotion, and justice serves as a reminder. Given the unique relationship between people and animals, if this story touched you, think about subscribing to our channel for additional motivational tales of bravery and tenacity. And remember to like and share this video with anybody who might need a reminder that the people we trust the most may sometimes help us win the hardest battles. We would love to know in the comments what motivates you to keep going despite obstacles. Thank you for seeing, and we hope to see you in the next video.